My name is Sarah Price. I'm a psychological services practitioner with St. Nicholas Hospice, and we're going to be presenting a little information on compassion fatigue today.
Hello everyone, my name is Caroline Jones. I also work at the hospice as part of the psychological support team with Sarah. And together, as Sarah just said, we're going to do a talk on compassion fatigue. So Sarah, I'm going to go to the next slide.
Yes, please.
There you go. Okay, obviously some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, can push some buttons. So we just wanted to spend a little time talking about how to look after yourself. When you're watching this, just to consider how some of the things we talk about might make you feel. Take some time out to care for yourself, especially, this is compassion fatigue. This is a really important subject to talk about for people, especially those of you kind of in the care profession. So please do take time to, go through it slowly if you feel that's what you need to do. And we'll have a little reflection probably at the end. Is that fair to say, Sarah? And, use your team. I don't know if any of you that will watch this are kind of lone workers, but if you're part of a team, do use your team to support you. And if you're a lone worker, whether you have supervision or use your family, friends to, consider your self-care, which is really important. Okay, so next slide, Sarah's going to go through, and this slide is what is compassion fatigue?
Yeah, so compassion fatigue is bandied about quite a bit, but what is it? And I think for most of you watching today, you are probably a professional or lay carer. You're in an industry or role where you are caring for others. And the reason you're good at what you do is because you connect with others in ways that are difficult to explain. And even difficult to understand, that if you don't have the empathy and ability to connect with the people you're caring for, that you're not going to be very good at your job, and you're probably not going to stay with it. So the assumption is that everybody who's watching this video has those skills and have that desire to connect with people. But what happens is your ability to emotionally connect with your patients, residents, families is a gift, but it's also a challenge because caring for other people can drain you emotionally, can drain your empathy. And that's what we're going to talk about a bit today.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that's really important because I think we've had discussions at work before in the office about, I might pop home to Wales on the train or on the bus, and because I'm kind of a smiley, empathetic person, you catch someone's eye, you smile at them, and suddenly they're sat next to you on the bus telling you their life story. And I think that's right. If you're empathetic and kind, you often catch people's eye. And then when you're outside of work, you still get people coming to you.
And that's not something we want to curtail. That's a skill that, I don't know if it's a skill you teach people or if it's something that people are just born with, but it's definitely a talent and skill that any organization wants to use, and that's why you're good at what you do. So you don't want to stop those feelings, absolutely, but you want to make sure that they're not doing any damage to you.
Absolutely. And I think for me, there's times when I take the train or bus home to Wales that I will consciously open a book or open a magazine, and I might not be reading it, so over the top of it I'm people watching, because that's what we do. But actually that's a barrier in a sense to stop people doing that. If I feel on that particular trip that please don't come and sit next to me and talk to me today, I'm too tired, I'm compassion fatigued, I don't need it today, so I kind of use a magazine or something as a barrier.
And absolutely. And of course, that's not something you can do when you're working, that you can't put those boundaries or barriers up, that you have to keep that compassion and that empathy coming so that you can do your job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I love saying next slide.
Next slide.
Next slide.
So what's often asked is what's the difference between burnout and compassion fatigue? And there really is a difference between the two, but I think that they are used interchangeably. So sometimes when people are talking to you about compassion fatigue, they mean burnout. And sometimes when people are talking to you about burnout, they mean compassion fatigue. But by the books, burnout is stress that's cumulative, relatively predictable. Burnout arises from the normal stress and dissatisfaction of your work. And frequently it can be corrected with a bit of holiday or a day off or something like that. Compassion fatigue, on the other hand, arises from your emotional and personal feelings for the suffering. So there's a term that's used, vicarious trauma, which is if you're working with people who are in need constantly, and you're feeling this compassion and this empathy for them constantly, that you're actually absorbing their trauma through their eyes and ears. And so it's very difficult to sort of tweeze that apart, but you have trauma of clients is manifested in lots of ways. And so it becomes cumulative, and you need to learn how to recognize that when you're just beginning to sort of, I hate to say it this way, but feel too much, that every patient, client, resident, family that comes through the door is really causing you distress.
Yeah, and it's only really relatively recently, I would say in the past, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, I've really seen the distinction between burnout and compassion fatigue, because I used to think, oh, I'm kind of burning out, but actually it wasn't. It was that, when you work in this field, I always explain myself like I've got a net around me, so there are holes in the net and things get through. It's not a wall, it's a net.
That's a great way to explain it.
And a lot of stuff the net keeps out. It's too big to get through, but often with those holes, something will sneak through there, and you feel this immense empathy. And I think you used the word absorb, which I really like. That really kind of hits home for me. There's some patients, clients that you absorb the stuff, and it gets through the net, and you think, ooh, but it's recognizing it now, isn't it? Once you know what it is.
And just even discussing it now, it makes me think, we developed this training back at the beginning of the pandemic, when things were really fresh. And now I think that we have the hindsight to kind of look at it, and we can actually use that burnout versus compassion fatigue example for working in the pandemic. Burnout would be the constant changes in PPE or social distancing or isolation, the testing, the burnout of the day-to-day stress that accumulated is burnout. Whereas the compassion fatigue is having to tell families they can't visit their loved ones, having to tell patients that they have to come in alone, or having to tell patients that you can't see them, that you have to do a phone call. Those are the empathetic feelings and emotional baggage that comes with the compassion fatigue that came from the pandemic, seeing somebody die on their own. So you could use the pandemic and look at both the burnout and the compassion fatigue associated with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, it is sometimes hard to separate them, because there are there's some kind of, crossovers, aren't there? But certainly for me personally, I can much easier now separate when I'm feeling kind of burnt out from work and the hours and politics and all the stuff that goes with work, but the compassion fatigue, that I am tired of caring. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Next slide. The costs of compassion fatigue. So when we say costs, it can be financial, it can be obviously financial with your work. You might have to go off sick because you're compassion fatigued. But costs are also, personal costs as well as kind of financial and all that. So as you can see by that list, your job performance could go down. You're tired of caring. You can't be bothered. You want to be bothered. Of course you do. That's why you're in this job. But you're so tired of it That's when mistakes are made. You miss things. And when your morale drops, we all know what that's like. We've all been there. You just can't be bothered. You'll do the bare minimum. I'll get through the day. I'll do what I can. I'll do what I need to do. No extras. Personal relationships deteriorate. You can take this home with you. You're that tired that when you get home, you haven't got time for your family. You haven't got time for your partner. You're just shattered. Personality deteriorates. That's an interesting one, isn't it? You might lose your sense of humor. You might lose your sense of self. You don't want to go out when friends invite you out. You'd rather snuggle down, and that's a normal thing, and that's a nice thing if you work hard. But actually, it's something to keep an eye on, I think.
Yeah, and I think using your description earlier about the net instead of the wall, I think some people in our field then feel like they need to have a wall because the net's not working.
Yes.
And then again, it jeopardizes your ability to do the job you love because you're building walls instead of using that net system.
But yes, absolutely. And nothing's going to get over or through that wall. So then, you are this island behind this wall, and how then do you show your empathy and compassion? How do you do that? So it's about getting it right, isn't it? And I suppose with the net analogy, it's getting the holes in the net right. You don't want them to be too big and you don't want them to be too small. It's got to be just right to catch things, which is quite a nice metaphor, I think. I always try and imagine that net. And overall decline in health, that goes without saying. If your morale's down, if you're making mistakes at work, if your personal and family relationships deteriorating, that is
immune systems compromised, sick days.
Yeah.
And I really like this slide on an organizational level. So I don't know if we have anybody in management, line managers, supervisors watching today. And we don't often get people from HR departments, but it's an important thing organizationally, and companies and businesses and clinics or what have you that who recognize these risks and recognize the costs of compassion fatigue tend to have very good well-being systems and try to stress the well-being of their staff because they see the risks to the organization and then certainly risks to patients and families and clients if mistakes are being made.
Yeah, and backing that up for people that are in management roles, it's kind of having that helicopter view of your staff, isn't it? Looking down from the helicopter over them, seeing who you might be able to see that's struggling a little bit, or again, burnout versus compassion fatigue.
And recognizing the need for clinical supervision, reflective practice, and all those sorts of things to keep their staff healthy. Yeah,
so important. So what compassion fatigue might look like?
Yes, so there are a bunch of different ways, and we'll get in more in depth in this in a little later on. But so far we've covered, what it is and why it's important to sort of recognize it, and what it can look like if you're being self-reflective or if you're a manager looking at your staff. First would be the physical, that people could have headaches, digestive problems, muscle tension, fatigue, if their stress and anxiety manifests itself in that way.
And then emotional, sadness, grief, inability to feel empathy, feelings of dread. I think that inability to feel empathy is the one that kind of jumps out at me, really. When you've got nothing left to give, you're empty, you're going through the motions, you're doing it, but you don't feel like you can give that extra little bit that often we give in this environment. It's just, let's just get the job done and move on. You've lost that X factor.
Yeah, and I have to say, from a personal experience, one time that I recognized that something was absolutely wrong is when repeatedly, on the drive into work, by the time I got to the car park, I just really didn't want to park the car. I really just wanted to turn the vehicle around. That feeling of dread that, what is today going to bring? And I'm just not ready for it.
Yeah.
Behavioral, again, I mentioned earlier, overusing sick days, addiction, and addiction can be to food, exercise, caffeine, alcohol, drugs, disturbances in relationships, where, you're building up that wall, but you're also blocking out the people that you want to be on that side of the wall with you, so you're not talking to family members because, you just don't want to complain about work anymore, or, whatever it might be. And shifts in sleeping. I think that's probably one of the most common reports that we get is, intrusive thoughts where you can't get to sleep at night because you're thinking about the next day, or you're thinking about the previous day. You're reliving something that happened, earlier in the week, or you're anticipating something that's going to come, and so it keeps you from getting sleep, or it wakes you up in the middle of the night and then you can't get back to sleep.
Yeah. And following on from that, cognitively, nightmares is the first thing that comes up. So, as Sarah was talking about sleep, if you can sleep, or when you can sleep, you might have nightmares about the shift that you've just done, or a nightmare about your upcoming shift and what's going to happen at work, things like that. Inability to concentrate. Yep. Again, that's something we've all had, I think, shifts in beliefs and avoidance. And Sarah spoke a little bit about avoidance earlier with the car, not wanting to go to work, wanting to just not stop the car, turn around and go back home.
Yeah, so and you could also be avoiding certain shifts, avoiding certain coworkers, or certain patients, or certain residents. It could be all of those. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, so the next slide is called How to Avoid.
Speaking of how to avoid, but this is in a good way, how to avoid the compassion fatigue, because that's obviously, the best medicine is preventative, right? So the best thing to do is to avoid it in general.
Yeah.
And the first thing would be recognizing it and accepting it's a thing. And we sort of touched on that a couple slides ago about the costs. It's really important that management understands this is an actual problem, that HR understands it's an actual problem, but it's also important that we as individuals recognize that this is something that we have to be on the lookout for. So recognizing, accepting it, that it's not, that it is a natural outcome of trauma, that, doing what you do, the kind of work you do, it would be unnatural if you didn't experience these emotions and these feelings. It's an occupational hazard. If you're going to be good at what you do, this is the risk you take. It's a normal response. So if you're in the medical field as like an HCA or a nurse, just like, a twinge in your back, or needing to be careful of muscle groups because of lifting and turning people, you are aware that is a risk and a hazard of what you do. So, plan accordingly.
Yeah. And know that putting yourself first is not selfish. We used to have a poster in our office at work. I'm not sure it's still there. You cannot pour from an empty cup, or you cannot serve from an empty bowl, I think the one in our office said. If you're empty yourself, how are you expected to fill other people up? You need to be full yourself to be able to give. I just really, that saying really resonates with me. It's about filling yourself up as much as you can. And by filling yourself up, it could be, going to the gym, going to the spa, having a massage, having a day off, having a day on the sofa, watching Netflix, whatever it is that fills you up, that gives you back your physical and emotional energy, topping yourself up so you can give again.
The example I've heard that I like as well, the real world example is, if you've ever flown, and they do that presentation at the beginning about the oxygen mask dropping down, and they always tell you, put it on your face first, and then help your child or help somebody else, but always do yourself first, because what good are you to somebody else if you pass out, or and it's the same, that's the same idea, that if you are in a caring role and you can't do that anymore, then that's the greatest loss. We need you to take care of yourself so that you can continue doing what you do. And it could be even on the work front, it could be recognizing a patient or a resident that you can't work with, that's not a good idea for you to work with them because of whatever buttons they may push. or recognizing that you need to take time off, or recognizing that you need to take a toilet break or a lunch break. We know that happens. So, you know, that if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, you're going to fall and fail. And then that's a real problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I like that analogy of the airplane, because it does really put it in real terms, doesn't it? You know, look after yourself. Once you're full of oxygen, you can then put your oxygen on the people that are around you.
And then we also have creating emotional boundaries. And it takes us back to Caroline's point about, you know, the net versus the wall kind of a thing. You know, it's a good idea to create emotional boundaries, just as long as they're appropriate. You know, it sounds counterintuitive, but you can have a more holistic approach when not too close to be objective. So if you think about, you know, we're all holistic practitioners, and we strive to be holistic practitioners. But sometimes if you get too close to, you know, I think that I can't remember exactly how that analogy goes with the elephant, where, you know, everybody describes the elephant differently. But if you get too close, so using the example of a patient, if you know, had a traumatic loss because of lung cancer or something, and a patient comes through who's maybe the same age as the person you care about with the same diagnosis, you can become really focused on that diagnosis, the lung cancer, instead of taking a step back and being very holistic, not being, you know, having the boundaries to say, you know, not every situation is the same. This is not the same as the situation I've been through personally. So that's one kind of sort of example of how you make sure that you kind of have a boundary to remind yourself, oh, you know, this patient has kids the same age as my kids, and so I'm feeling too close to that. And it takes some self-talk, but it also, most importantly, is how to recognize it, see it kind of coming through the door, and realize that, you know, I'm going to have to be on my toes with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, going back to that helicopter view, I find personally, if I can metaphorically look at the family, the patient, the family, the situation from up above, and look down at it with myself in that picture. So I'm in that picture as well, looking where I am, you know, kind of quite a systemic approach. Then you can sometimes, when you're in it, you can't see the wood for the trees, which is the elephant thing, isn't it? When you're looking at an elephant, you're too close. That's all you can see is one little bit of the elephant. You don't know it's an elephant, you just see some grey. But when you stand back, you see the whole picture. Okay, building resilience is the next slide.
Yeah, so you know, we've talked about the need to recognize compassion fatigue, that it's a real concern, and ideas on how to try to avoid it, but that's not always possible. Again, as we said before, it's an occupational hazard that we can expect to go through at some point in our careers, if not multiple times. So if we get to that point where we really feel like we have some compassion fatigue weighing us down, the way to sort of prep for that is to build resilience, even in the moment or in advance. So you might not be concerned with this right now. You might feel like, you know, you're tip top and chipper, but now's a good time to start building resilience. But the nice thing about building resilience is, even if you're in the midst of episode of some compassion fatigue, these tips will still work. You can build resilience in the moment or after the fact. But if you don't have some of these things in your life now, we highly recommend trying to incorporate some as best you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, as you can see by our little graphic, you know, building resilience is an equation of coping skills, grit, your senses. You know, there are all sorts of things you kind of build together, and hopefully it comes to equal resilience. Some of the areas are, Caroline, you want to run through those?
Sure, yeah. I mean, physical, you know, that could be making sure that you're I say fit, you know, that you're looking after yourself physically. Psychological, I mean, a lot of these kind of, you know, I don't need to really go into, but emotional, spiritual, professional, and relational. I was just thinking of something Sarah said about, you know, being resilient in the moment. And I remember in a past life working on a ward and having a bit of, I think I just recognized I had a bit of compassion fatigue with one particular patient that kept ringing the bell, kept ringing the bell, kept ringing the bell, kept ringing the bell. You go, you go, you go. And there's a point where you go, I really need to step away from this because, I'm kind of at my wit's end, and actually go in on a toilet break and just sitting on the loo for 5 minutes, just breathing, gathering myself, wash my hands under some cold water, pop some cold water on my face. And actually I went back out in a different headspace. So there's things you can do in the moment. But going back to these, I'm just going to pick one. Spiritual, whether you follow a particular faith, or whether spirituality for you is, going for a walk in the woods, or however you are spiritually, that can be really important. I quite like that graphic is quite nice there, Sarah.
Yeah,
I didn't do that one. I think you did that one, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah, I like that.
And these subcategories we'll go into with a little more depth in a moment as we carry on. But if you recall back at what we said, compassion fatigue may look like, so physical was, headaches, emotional was, we talked about cognitive and behavioral. Some of these fit underneath them. So it's not an exact science, but if you suffer from, say, physical signs of compassion fatigue, like headaches or run down and those sorts of things, then the physical resilience tools may be your best bet. So if you are, struggling with some of the more emotional signs of compassion fatigue, you might find some of the ways of building resilience emotionally might work for you. There's no rhyme or reason to this. It's really what you, as we go through these, what you find would work best for you, or you have the most interest in. Obviously, any of these tips that you have no interest in will not work for you. And then sometimes there are things that you may find very interesting, but you can't fit them in because of your personal life, your lifestyle, your work life, whatever it might be. So this next bit that we're going to start to go into is really just going to be a list of ideas. It is not in any way all encompassing. If you would like a copy of this PowerPoint, you can always email St. Nicholas Hospice and ask for the psychological services team, and we can send one out to you. We have no problem sharing this with you. And like I said, it's not all encompassing. So we're just going to talk about some of these. Caroline, what we would normally do if this was a live in-person training, we'd break you out into breakout sessions, and you could talk about this amongst yourselves, things that you do or don't do or why. So Caroline and I are going to do that a little bit, talk to you about the ones that we do or the ones that we wouldn't be interested in, because that's okay too. And we'll start with physical.
Yeah, and physical, you can see the healthy diet, calm space, bedtime routines, all the things we all know. Holidays. Now, on a personal level, holidays are really important to me. That is the time that I can go away, have some sun, lie on a lounger, read a book, not think about much. So for me, the COVID pandemic was really tricky, actually, because obviously we couldn't holiday for a couple of years, and that was really the thing that I do, and I needed to find other things that would fit, fill that space. For some people, holidays don't do it, and that's fine. That just personally for me, I found the pandemic really difficult, not being able to take my holidays and have a bit of sun and all that sort of thing. But some people love to go to the gym twice a week, 3 times a week. That's physical. Did you want to do psychological?
Yeah, well, I was going to say for me, it's the friends and family more than the holidays. And so the advent of Teams and Zoom and FaceTime has really made a big difference in my well-being. I think I wonder how many people really commit to a healthy diet. I think we all struggle with some of these. And I thought I would take a moment to say, this is in no way supposed to be one more chore for you to do. So you really do want to pick things like going to the gym 3 times a week. That works for me, and that makes a big difference for me. But there was a great, I don't have young children, I have grown children, that sort of thing. There was a time where that would have been such a hurdle
Yeah.
to make the time out to go to the gym. And obviously there were times in COVID where you couldn't do that. But you want to make sure that it's something that isn't another chore, that isn't one more thing on your plate that's going to stress you out because you didn't do that. Creating bedtime routines. Again, if you're a night owl, deciding that you're going to be in bed every night by 9 o'clock so that you get enough sleep, it might be unrealistic. And then it just becomes one more thing you didn't get done. So you do want it to be things that you feel like you could do that would work for you. And that's why we're trying to present so many, because you can throw them away, throw them around. And again, like finding physical activities you enjoy. Maybe you're not a gym person, but maybe you need to take a walk every day. You need to get outside and take a walk. And when we get further on, that fits under sort of spirituality too. Some people need to do that because they need to be outdoors at some point during the day. But so some of these things that we'll come up with will fit under various categories as well.
That's absolutely right. Like Sarah said, this isn't an exhaustive list. You don't have to tick them off. This is just things that maybe the teams come up with that help us. Psychologically, working with a counsellor therapist. I like journaling about your days and leaving bad experiences on the page. I have worked with people that write down their bad experiences and then burn it, throw it on a fire or rip it up into bits and put it in the bin, just to kind of get it down on paper and then get rid of it so it's not up here.
I'm actually a big fan of that. I like the cathartic experience of getting it out, but also destroying it.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I can't just write it down and then leave it because it's kind of still there. So getting rid of it's a really kind of cathartic thing to do. That's right. Confiding in a friend or colleague. Like we mentioned earlier, if you're part of a team, you might have team members that you can offload to and talk to. If you're a lone worker, yes, a bit more tricky, but use friends, use family.
I think I can safely say Caroline and I rely on that heavily.
Absolutely. I think that's fair to say.
And another one with the journaling is I have some people who told me that instead of journaling, they do letter writing as well. So let's say you have a difficult encounter with a colleague, supervisor, or a family member, work-related family member, patient, resident, that you can actually write the letter to them and then again destroy it, just to get those thoughts out.
Yeah, like that. And
so
then we'll
emotional.
Go on, Sarah.
Oh, there we go. Emotional. Spending time with people you love, if that works for you. We have a manager here who's very into self-affirmations, and she's got a jar in her office where you can go in and pull one out, which is very nice. Make sure to laugh and cry. Don't hold the emotions in. Having a sense of humor helps. Find an enjoyable volunteer activity that can distance you. Keep a running list of moments that made you feel strong. That kind of goes back to the journaling. I think starting for me, I'm not really good at the self-affirmation. So luckily, like I said, there's Gemma here at the office who's really kind of into that. But that one doesn't particularly sing out to me, but certainly laughing and making light of a situation helps me quite a bit.
Yeah. And spirituality, we kind of touched on this earlier. It doesn't matter if you have a faith, if you don't have a faith. Spirituality is bigger than that, isn't it? Mm-hmm. If you do have a faith, perhaps going to church or going to the mosque or wherever your place of worship is, is really helpful for some people. Spirituality can be a walk in the woods. Spending time in nature is on that list. Some people like to go wild swimming, or there's all sorts of things that the spirituality umbrella encompasses.
Yeah, and I find with us working at hospice, I know I meet a lot of people who might go into our chapel to light a candle or do some of those things, even though that they claim not to have any faith or don't have an identified faith. Some things are ritualistic and give you sort of a sense of spirituality without it needing to be faith-based. And then, of course, if you are faith-based, you could go to your place of worship, as Caroline said, or find some other way to make use of that.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so I'll start with the professional. I know this is easier said than done for a lot of people, but altering shift patterns, take plenty of breaks, create a peer support group, ask for mentor supervision meetings. There are lots of different things. One of the things I find most interesting is, having worked for many, many years, is I call it the whinge. That some people, you do it over a cup of tea or at the water cooler or in the car park at the end of the day. And that's a delicate balance, because if you find yourself having a bit of a whinge and you feel refreshed and lighter, that's a great thing, and you and your colleague have a bit of a laugh and you move on. If you find that you are sought out frequently, particularly by the same people who really whinge and drain your energy and drain your mood and drain your attitude, that's something that's not good. So some of these things are a delicate balance of saying, I don't think I don't, if I see them in the car park, I don't think I'm going to stop and chat with them, because it always, brings you down. So it is that self-reflection of recognizing, is this a good situation, or is this maybe a pattern that I want to stop? And I also know that taking breaks sometimes are out of your control, and your shift patterns are out of your control. But if you can't find colleagues that you can do this with, that you can build these peer groups with, or a mentor, you might want to go through, an organized body, so if it's a nurse or an HCA, maybe, somebody in that role somewhere else that you can just chat with occasionally, to vent and to unload and sort of brace yourself for the challenges ahead.
Yeah, and that when we go on to kind of relational, that's quite a nice bridge, really, because cutting out toxic relationships, and identifying individuals who check on you. So like Sarah was just saying, it's great to have a whinge when you're whinging to the person and they're whinging back, and it's done, dusted, move on. You don't want any toxicity in your relationships, and that can be really difficult. We've all had and have friends that take, and you kind of get nothing back, and it's a bit toxic. And when you're looking after yourself, self-care, there's a time when you have to think about who you build relationships with, and what kind of you're getting out of them, really. So that's a really interesting topic that I'm interested in, because it's not just work colleagues, it's relationships outside of work. You're doing a really difficult job. When you come out of that job and you come home, you want to be around people that maybe have the same interests, people that are quite light, people that make you laugh. You don't want to be constantly giving. We go back to the empty cup. You want people to fill you up, people to fill your cup up, so that when you go to work the following day, you feel full again. And maintaining boundaries. We've spoken quite a lot about the wall and the net, and that's how we talk about our boundaries. But it's talking about boundaries in your personal life as well. Not having friends and family that constantly, I want to say, prey on your empathy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and another thing I've noticed too is with the maintaining the boundaries is to keep those worlds sort of separate. So there are different ways to do it. Like I happen to have a work phone and a work laptop, so I keep it in a particular place in my house, so that it's away. It's not open in the evening. It's not open on the weekends. As well as if you're in, say, a medical field, you may have a uniform that you wear while you're at work. Is making sure that you have a routine. Whereas as soon as you walk in the door from home, you change out of that uniform, you put on your civilian clothes, and you put that away. And if you need a few minutes just to process, but then you're in home mode, so that you're not kind of sitting on the settee thinking about a patient or a client, to find a way to kind of put that aside, and you're not going to deal with that until your next shift, kind of a thing. It's easier said than done, and it takes some practice, and it works better for some people than others. I know some people who would make sure they change out of their uniform, and I guess during COVID had to, before they left the building that they worked in, they wouldn't put their uniform on until they got in the building they worked in. And I think that helps keep boundaries, having a system like that, that not sometimes you do it and sometimes you don't, but having it's like, I do this every time, and it's a signal to to my mind, cognitively, emotionally, psychologically, physically, that I'm no longer working, or I am now working, sort of like an on-off switch. But
I think that's really important, Sarah. And an ex-colleague of mine always said that she would, when she got in from work, although she wore, as you say, civilian clothes, she wasn't in uniform. When she came home, the first thing she'd do was take her clothes off, have a shower, and then put some fresh clothes on. And I actually have kind of adopted that routine now. And the shower is not only it's kind of a cleansing thing. I watch the water go down the plug hole, and it's like, that's work gone. Put my civilian clothes on, and then I feel like now I'm me. My work mask has come off. That's gone. That day's gone. It's gone down the plug hole.
Yeah, and I imagine you could do that by, washing your hands and face or something, like if you didn't want to show. But yeah, I think those are great ideas, and it's going to be something different for everybody, and finding out what works for you.
Yeah,
and as we said, this is in no way an all-inclusive, all-encompassing list. I know some other people have given us ideas before that aren't on this list, like using. I think Caroline, you told me some apps that people sometimes use, relaxation apps, and
yeah, there's one called Calm, CALM, that you can download on your phone, and it plays all sorts of, like, I mean, there is a part of it that you might, if you wanted to, that you can pay for, but there's a free part of it as well. It plays all sorts of meditation, or if you want kind of, the sea or the forest, and it's quite nice, and they're timed as well. You can do a 10-minute one or a 15-minute one, so they're not long. 10 minutes led on the sofa or on your bed when you come home, just listening to this just brings the shoulders down. It's rather lovely.
And I think for a lot of people, I know you and I included, music in general is really important. So listening to loud rocking music, if you really just want to kind of disappear for a little bit, or relaxing music, or sentimental music, or music that helps you reminisce. Music in general can bring and evoke all sorts of feelings and thoughts, and can be used for a lot of these sorts of things.
Absolutely. Right, I'm going to stop sharing now, Sarah, because I think that's all the slides, isn't it?
I think that's it for the slides.
So we're going, there we are.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, everybody. So, this is the time at the end where we would discuss reflecting on what we've discussed, and people's thoughts and experiences. And unfortunately, in this sort of format, in this platform, we can't do that very well. You can always reach out to Caroline and myself, or any of our staff at St. Nicholas Hospice on the psychological services team. What do you have to add to that, Caroline?
I think you've summed it up, really. Reach out. It's hard to know who's going to be watching this at the moment, so we've tried to aim it to as many kind of people as we can. But if you want to reach out to us, Sarah and I both work at St. Nicholas Hospice as part of the psychological support team. We have other members of the team as well. So yeah, thank you very much for watching and listening. Hopefully it'll just get you thinking about compassion fatigue and self-care. That's really the main aim, isn't it, Sarah?
That's it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye.